Hey guys, it's Friday, November 8th, and this has been a wild week, the election week. And for this week, at least this week, I'm doing my Ramsey poll shows at night at 8 p.m. Central. I don't know if I'll make the time change permanent. In some ways, it works out a little bit better for me. We will see. We will see, but be sure to turn in. And yeah, this election was surprising. Trump and the Republicans did better than I can even imagine. Trump won the popular vote. And I'm hesitating here because sometimes you have a belief, but then you look at the data. And part about being on the right, I believe, I've always said this, is dealing with reality, not what you wish it to be. Because the left, they deal in pretend world. They think if you have the proper narrative, if a man puts on a dress, then he is a woman. If we get everyone to believe that and censor everyone from saying otherwise, it'll make it true. When no, it's still just a man in a dress. That's all it is, right? And so I've always said that, but I got to apply that to myself. I used to say that, well, it's just a matter of time. I think the last election, I'm saying I don't think the Republicans can ever win again. 4 years of Joe Biden, massive immigration. We have states like Texas, especially, they're turning more and more brown. It's lost. Texas will become purple, kind of a battleground state, and then soon it will be a blue state. A lot of people have said that. Even Democrats have said that. This is their strategy. Bring the people in, replace Americans, and it's going to be a one-party state. And everyone felt pretty good about it. It seemed pretty good logic. But then all of a sudden, we have this crappy thing called reality pop up. And here's reality. In 2016, the red is Republican, blue Democrat. And then 2020, it got actually redder. And then 2024 is like, what the hell? It's like almost all of Texas, every county except for a few now, voted for Trump over Kamala. So what's happening here? What is happening here? This shouldn't be happening, right? These Mexicans come in, they should vote for the Democrats. That's what everyone thought, but we're not seeing it. And I think we got to really reevaluate this. My first concern with that whole trope, right, that we're going to become a one-party state was Florida, because Florida has a heavy Latino population. And it started with the Cubans. The Cubans came in, and you remember I think we called them the boat people back in the day. If you ever saw the movie Scarface, it kind of dealt with that era in the early 80s. And they came in, and it was like, oh God, this is going to destroy Florida. And there was a lot of negatives, but the Cubans now, they're really hardcore Republicans. And again, we thought, well, that's a one-off. The Cubans are, of all the Hispanics, are like the best. But it's not going to apply to other groups. But we're seeing it apply to other groups, at least in certain areas. And this is where it gets kind of strange, because Mexican immigrants from Texas act very different than Mexican immigrants in California. And this, you could go into the reasons why, but there is a difference there. And I think life is a little bit more complicated than we make it into these clean categories. Even that term Hispanic, I've known Hispanic people, and they're not all the same. And to try to classify them all the same is just a little bit silly. And that happened, remember the Madison Square Garden, where the comedian made a joke about Puerto Rico. I mean, he's an insult comedian. He makes jokes about all people. And he made a joke about Puerto Rico. And the Democrats like, oh, it's over. It's over. Trump, there's no way he's lost the Latino vote. But, I know some Mexicans, they don't really like Puerto Ricans, and they thought the joke was funny. And so, it's like, well, wait a minute. You hear this like white liberal establishment, they have the view of how things should be, but on the ground, it's a little bit different. I think on the ground, especially in Texas, Mexicans that live in America, they don't want to see America turn into Mexico. They don't want us to see us turn into a third world. Say like Pedro comes over here, he's legal, he works hard. I don't think he wants to see his taxes to go to pay for a sex change of an illegal. The Democrats always thought he would, but we're just not seeing that. So I think that whole model has been kind of broken. I think it's a little bit more complicated that with that concerning immigration, because as I've always said, people aren't the same, and individuals are all different, but you have various ethnic groups that are very different. And just like I've always said, white people are very different. Russians are very different. Let's say Germans. When I lived there, when I lived in Europe, I really learned that they see people as very different, different ethnicities. The Russians, this girl I knew at the time said, Russians, they have like a different soul than Germans, the way they look at the world. They're both white, but they're very different. And I think you see this in other communities, especially with like the Hispanic community, you have different groups. Now, there's other groups that are more monolithic, like blacks. Blacks are always hardcore Democrats, although some black men, it's like almost a quarter, voted for Trump. So that's changing a little bit too. But I think the point is, I'm trying to say is, oh, Ramsey Paul, are you cucky now? You believe in open borders, bring everyone in the world in America? Absolutely not. What I'm saying is a desire for self-determination. I want to live in a country that's basically my people. I'm not a purist or anything, where we speak English, we have common customs that bind us together. That's what I want. I want self-determination. So I don't really base my immigration policy based on how good or bad the immigrants are. And I'm not trying to say that all the immigrants are exactly the same. Immigrants from Mexico are very different from immigrants from Haiti. People aren't the same. And immigrants from Japan. So my wanting a country for our people, traditional Americans, is not based on other groups are good or bad necessarily. Although some groups I think are pretty bad. I'm not going to say which ones, but and other groups are pretty good. But it doesn't reflect necessarily in their politics. For example, would you rather live in a Mexican area that is red, they vote Republican, or around a bunch of Japanese, let's say in Seattle? Yeah, probably living around the Japanese would be nicer, but the Japanese people, even though, they have low crime rates, they're very industrious, they vote heavily Democrat. They're different people than us. And I love the Japanese people. I love East Asians, but they're not us. They have their own homeland. We should have our own homeland and homelands, like Germany for the Germans and so forth. So I guess what I'm saying is we got to be careful about some of our assumptions, and it's just not about people being bad or good. There's a lot of good people around the world, and that's great. And we have to understand that. That's not the reason many of us are opposed to open borders. We're opposed to it because we want to have our own homeland. But are there great Mexicans? You bet. There really are. And realistically, it's not like we're going to deport every Mexican out of here, especially if they're citizens. That's not going to happen. But we do have to get the illegals out. And some of the people that came in recently, over the past, I would say 4 or 8 years, we got to reevaluate that. And I think Trump will do that. I think that's a realistic option. So I'm the first one to say if I'm wrong, and I was totally wrong about Texas. I thought in 2016, would tell you, hey, in 8 years, it's going to be a blue state. It's more red than ever. And it's not because we've deported a bunch of Mexicans. In fact, there's more Mexicans in Texas than ever before, and it's become redder. In fact, Texas is more red than Vermont, which is almost like 100% white. It's these assumptions we have, I don't think necessarily are holding true. Anyway, guys, I hope you have a great weekend, and I will talk to you guys later. I'm doing my show tonight too, so watch that.